Well, good evening. Thank you so much for watching this first of many series, hopefully, Meet the Musicians event. My name is Brenton McGee, and I am the Performing Arts Associate here at Friends Home in Kennett. And it's my joy and honor to start these series hosted by Friends Home in Kennett Square. These series are meant for our residents and perhaps family members to meet living musicians, whether composers, performers, or people all over the world. And our first person is a friend of mine. We were colleagues at Westchester University, both where we went to school. And I'll read a little bit about his background, and then he will present his music today. Isaac Duquette is an up-and-coming freelance composer and horn player from Reading, Pennsylvania. He attended Westchester University, where he studied horn performance and music composition. Currently, he is an instrumental studies graduate assistant at Temple University, and he's going for his master's there. Isaac is a hardworking and studious horn player and composer who strives for peak excellence in both himself and his art. So Isaac is not only a wonderful musician, he is a wonderful friend as well. And a couple weeks ago, and he'll talk about it in his lecture, I got to record one of his pieces last Sunday at your dad's church in Reading, and that was called Forever Sleeping, and that should be out hopefully soon for the public. And so hopefully, so I did my part, I recorded my part, and it was under 5 hours. That was the best part. It took less than 5 hours. So that was pretty good. And it was difficult because I had to scream on pitch and speak on pitch and rhythms and stuff like that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Isaac Duquette, the floor is yours.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for having me. It's wonderful to be here. As Brenton said, we've known each other for quite a long time. We actually had a composition class together. That's where we first met back when I was in my undergraduate years, and I think that was my sophomore year of undergrad, and Brenton was pursuing a master's degree there as well. We've stayed connected ever since. So I think the best way to start this is I'll play something I wrote recently. And this piece was written for the Westchester University concert band, and it's scheduled to be premiered this November. This piece is called A Journey Through Life. So that piece started its life just over a year ago. I reached out just after all the COVID shutdowns to the director of the concert band and said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great with how awful the shutdown has been and how prolonged it's being, if we had some kind of piece to celebrate coming back to being able to play music in person again and have these moments that we haven't had for so long together again." And he agreed that it would be wonderful. So we talked a lot about what we wanted from the piece. And from there, I just kind of got the reins and we were off. So I'm very much looking forward to this November when the Westchester University Concert Band performs its work. So that'll be very exciting. I figured the next piece I would talk about is the work I worked on with Brenton, which is my piece, Forever Sleeping. Forever Sleeping is a work in 3 movements, and it's about mental health awareness. And it tells the story of 2 characters who are deeply unwell and deeply depressed. And as I wrote this, I envisioned 2 characters walking down a city street telling their stories. And then in the second movement, they finally meet and agree to help each other end each other. And thankfully, neither of the characters ends up being successful. And they talk about coming to terms with that grief and how to move on. The end goal of the work is to spread awareness for mental health and to kind of help end the stigma around it, and hopefully help a bunch of people in the process. So as Brenton mentioned, he came to my dad's church last week, and we did about a 4-hour recording session. And there are 5 different instruments in this piece. There's a soprano, who in this case, the soprano part was sung by the wonderful Kristen Soreski, who goes to LBC and studies voice performance. There's the tenor, which was performed by Brenton McGee. The cello, which was performed by Luke Lee yesterday night for 4 hours. And then the pianist is Aaron Hungerford. So 4 parts. And each part was about a 4-hour recording session. So everyone came to my dad's church. I mic'd them up. And then from there, we just did several takes until we got what we wanted out of it. And the result is this is what the first movement ended up looking like. If I open up the session here. So this is the software I used to create this movement. Every color you see here comes from at least one take, meaning I recorded one pass through. And you can notice that it looks pretty cut and put together. So the nice thing is I was able to take the best of everything and put it together into a much more finished product. And so I wouldn't say that at this point it's done, but I'm very happy with how far we've come so far. If I go over here, this is Brenton's track here. And if I click this button here, you can see how many takes we did. Every single one of these, it's called a playlist, is one take that we did. And you can see how long the takes were. And if I just keep going down, you can see that for the first movement alone, Brenton and I did 73 takes just for the first movement. And those were the takes that we kept. I'm sure there were many more than that we just quickly had deleted. And so this was the end result. So now I'll play a little bit of Forever Sleeping. This is the first movement.
All these people passing by, their faces are empty, none can know why. Look at all these people passing by, none of them can know why. Only the darkness of rooms can offer me peace. Only when I solitude can I feel my mind rest. I'm starting to grow very tired of never getting to feel happiness. Only the darkness of rooms can offer me peace. Only when isolated can I feel my mind rest. After all the lone and dark nights, without a place that I feel I belong. After all the pain and heartache, it's time to let myself rest. I'm growing tired. 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 It's time to rest. Good night. Dearest friends, good night. I am tired. I need rest. Good night.
So that's the first movement. I'm very happy so far with how this turned out. And again, I'd like to thank Brenton for all that he did to help make this work happen. Um, as you can see, it's when you look at that, there's a lot that goes into getting these kinds of productions ready. And that brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is being a composer now in the times of COVID. Um, it's nice that things are finally opening up. However, before and during the times of COVID, um, to be a successful composer, you need to be able to get performances. If no one's performing your music, you're not going to be able to make this your profession and do this as a career. So thankfully, there are ways to get around this, which is doing exactly what I did here. And that's really why it started in the first place. This work was supposed to be on my senior recital at Westchester. And because of COVID, I never got to have that opportunity to do that. We were going to perform it in front of a live audience and just record that and use that live performance as the recording. And COVID ended up being a blessing in disguise in that way because we weren't able to do that, it forced us to, if we wanted to still bring this work to the public's eye, go through much more involved, but also much more crafty ways of producing this. And the end result is something that's a lot more polished. And it just sounds fantastic. And I can't speak highly enough of everyone who was involved to make this work sound as great as it does. Without the great performers, I wouldn't be able to have such a great recording of this piece. And then the last piece I want to share is the last movement of my first symphony. I was very fortunate while at Westchester to have the tutelage of Maestro Joseph Caminiti, and he helped me isolate and finish something that was a multi-year long project. I started this my sophomore year of college. That was the fall of 2017, and I finished this in 2019. The work was initially almost an hour long, and with his help, we actually managed to make it shorter, but also a lot better. And I wrote this work about the countryside, specifically up near Kutztown, Pennsylvania. My fiance's family has a camper up there, and I just think it's some of the most beautiful scenery you can find in Pennsylvania. So I shall share the audio now. I'd like to thank you all again for having me. And with that, we can open up the floor for questions.
Great. Let's give Isaac a hand here. Well, thank you. Very impressive music, especially that last one. I really enjoyed that last one. We'll get into details. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Duquette about his music, his background, or anything? And if you do, just let me know. I've got a few. So even if none of them have questions, I certainly do have questions. Rose, yeah, go ahead.
What inspired you to take up music in the first place? What is your background as far as growing up?
What inspired you to get into music, and what is your background?
What inspired me to get into music? When I was in elementary school, I got first introduced into playing music. And I remember they did a string demonstration at my school, and somebody played the theme to Harry Potter. And I said, I don't know what instrument that is, but I have to play it. And it was viola. So I started actually on viola, but it ended up not being the instrument for me. So in fifth grade, I switched to clarinet. Played that for a few years. And then I wanted to play tuba starting in junior high, but the school didn't have enough tubas. So they said, well, we have this other thing you can play, which is the French horn. So I said, fine, I'll take it. And then no one taught me how to play it. So I ended up starting taking lessons in high school. I fell in love with the instrument, and really just had this passion. I knew I really wanted to write music. So for my senior project to graduate high school, I actually wrote a piece for full orchestra, because quite arrogantly, I heard something by Rimsky-Korsakov and said, oh, I'm sure I can do better. So I tried writing my own piece to kind of compete, and probably lost terribly because I was like 17 with very little music education background. But I enjoyed doing it so much that I knew I wanted to continue, and that was what I wanted to do.
Very good. Very good. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, I'd like to ask a question about, it seemed to me that the large patterns of your music I would think that a troupe of dancers would carry the message a little, helping to understand what part of it is relevant to part of the story you're trying to describe. But again, I thought the dancers would get tired after a while. Thought they couldn't sustain it for that period of time, but it might help to describe, put a little flesh on some of the meaning that you're trying to convey in your music.
Which piece? Which one are you talking about? Any particular piece? The first one, second or third?
There's both the second and the third.
So your question is more
the third. I think to lend itself to a dance interpretation. They don't have to be real vigorous, but I think it would help get your message across.
Yes. So the question is, well, yeah. So that's a good question. Is there, and again, we don't have background notes to this and stuff. And but I guess the question that to expand upon that was, what inspired the Forever Sleeping? And I mean, you did talk about that a little bit, about the mental health of people, but let's talk about the third movement particularly. Is the one that's most interesting. Did it have inspiration of dance in the music, right? So
inspiration of dance,
or like what kind of inspired you to write that way? And again, most of these people here are like non-music majors, so we'll have to talk in terms of like what were the things that inspired that symphony? Why loud and then soft and then loud, other than it's like a symphony, so
yeah. So in terms of the symphony, Um, Part of it was inspired just by some of the things I'd listened to, and also what I was playing at the time with some of my ensembles at Westchester. Um, and particularly in this piece inspired me for other things as well. Was there's a work by James Stevenson, his Second Symphony, and I love the way that he played and contrasted his louds and his softs, and the meaning that that provided. Um, I learned through these experiences that the relationships between the different techniques you use in music can add extra meaning, and that you don't have to stick necessarily to one way of doing things. There's a lot of different ways and different styles that you can write music, and all of them can serve a specific purpose. One is not necessarily better than the other. So while certain every genre and era of music and classical music has some kind of form that is most prominent. So like in the classical era, it's the classical style, romantic era, the romantic style. And then we get into different, more specific types when we get later on in musical history. Just because one is no longer as relevant as it used to be does not mean that it's any less relevant or useful.
Very good, very good. Yeah, and I think to say it in a way that helps that is that, and I've known this about your music for years, that you are a type of composer that's actually quite unusual for your age, in the sense that you have a lot of different musical styles in your music. I mean, I hear like Johannes Brahms in your music. I hear Haydn in your music. I hear, Thomas Aids, a modern English composer. Like you have a lot of variety, some Bach, some Bach inspiration, Mozart. And I think that that's very unusual for a young composer to have that. Most young composers usually stick to one style, whether it's minimalistic or, a fugue. So I commend you for even a bachelor's study, because you wrote this during your bachelor's study, I believe. So that's very unusual for a bachelor's student to have that much style. It's usually the master level of composition is when you start talking about, okay, let's write in a rondo form. Let's write in a sonata allegro form, those kind of classical forms. So when he means by a classical era, he's talking about music from the late 18th century. When he's talking about romantic music, he's talking about the 19th century and how it grows and stuff. It depends on the instrumentation and the harmonies and stuff like that. But I think that I really like the symphony the best out of the three, and I like Forever Sleeping, of course, because I'm in it. But I really like the symphony. I think it has a lot of potential to be really a great symphony. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and he says, why do you record music? Why do you write music? Why do we do music what we do? Well, sure, it's for us to help, love music and be inspired by music, but the music lives on beyond our lives. Like Mozart, who died over 200 years ago, but we still listen to Mozart's music. We still listen to Bach's music. We still listen to Frank Sinatra sing, even though he passed away, right? So the music outlives us. And I think that's what we do best as musicians is, I like when I know I'm young, but when I'm long and gone, when they go back to say, oh, what did Brenton McGee or Isaac Duquette did, they'll remember the music we did. And I think that is the most important thing about music. How it inspires people to go beyond our daily life, because life would be quite boring without music, if you think about it, And I think that symphony, going back on your symphony, I think there's a lot of qualities behind it. For people who are not familiar with, let's talk about the different forms. So obviously, let's talk about the differences between the wind band versus a chamber piece with 5 pieces, and like how big is your symphony orchestra? Because symphony orchestras are big pieces. They're lots of instruments. So can you
Yeah.
talk about like the differences between the three styles in terms of people who are not familiar with that, those three kind of genres?
Yeah. So the big difference between the wind bands and a symphony orchestra is the wind band doesn't have strings and is exclusively made out of winds and percussion. Sometimes there's
Exactly.
the addition of a string bass. Sometimes there's not. So in a symphony orchestra, you have two violins, a viola, a cello, a bass, and then above that you have flutes, oboes, clarinets, French horns, trumpets, trombones, tubas, and occasionally other instruments that are similar to those as well. I think bassoon.
Right. Exactly. So the main difference is your orchestra is your typical orchestra with strings, brass, percussion, sometimes usually timpani if it's like Haydn or Mozart. But a wind band would be no strings. It would be like anything that you would use your mouth for usually, except I heard some xylophone in there too. And the percussion. The other thing is the percussion is usually bigger. There's more percussive instruments in a wind band piece than your normal timpani. Bum 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 bum.
And
bum,
atypical.
Bum, bum. There's more instruments to it. Yeah.
Wind band also typically has more different percussion, should I say? For example, you have your typical percussion, which is like a snare drum or a bass drum, cymbals, those kinds of things. Whereas in a wind band, you have things like what's called a marching machine, which is like a box of it's just like a bunch of 2x4s. In the middle on strings you have these dowels, and what you do is you put it on like a platform and you go back and forth, and it makes it sound like you have an army marching. So yeah, the timbre.
Was that your inspiration about your first piece? Because the first piece in particular, and I've heard it before, but it has kind of that marching. It has kind of like what one of the residents talked about was it maybe kind of had like a dance feel or possibly a marching feel. Was that something that inspired you to write? Like, okay, so that
it's very rhythmic.
Question. Yes.
Yeah, very rhythmic was the thought process there. Actually, there is a marching machine part written in, and the thought there is just that one was COVID specific because it made me reflect on life and how we walk through life, because also around that time, Westchester had lost a student. Her name was Emily. And then we lost some other people who were part of the Westchester organization. And so sometimes life just feels like you're just marching on through it. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. And sometimes you just got to keep going through it. But at the end, we get to kind of look back and see all the great things that we got to do.
Great. I think that's great about the pieces. And the other, again, I think that, I don't know if it was atonal or bitonal. It sounded like more bitonal, but it kind of has like Charles Ives inspiration or something in the music. And then it gets totally tonal in B flat major.
Yep.
Like symphonic. And that's, again, I commend you for that you are, if I would describe you in, like what's the music of Isaac Duquette, I think the variety of music is what you are best for. And I think that I commend you a lot because there's not a lot of people your age group. And how old are you? Do you mind saying?
I turned 24 Monday.
So he's 24 years old and he wrote a symphony like that. That's pretty good. I mean, that's like, I'm curious to see how your symphony number 2 is 5-10 years from now. Those kind of things. I think you keep going, my friend, keep going.
Thank you.
So another resident who wasn't able to be here today talked about, and this is a great question. Is there a certain source of inspiration that is frequently used when you are beginning a new composition? So what kind of inspires you in the beginning process to write a new composition?
It depends. Sometimes it's life experiences. Sometimes it's what's going on in the world at the time. I've been inspired recently to write a lot about the experiences of going through COVID. Um, so, for example, that piece by Westchester is about that. I'm currently working on a piece for the Reading Choral Society, which is again about the reunification, and that piece tackles it a little bit differently. That one's more focused on um, what it felt like emotionally to have everything end. Things taking longer than we had hoped for, and then the glory of reunification again, which was it's exciting to work on.
Great, great. Does anybody else have questions for him? Yes.
I just wanted to know if he has a long-term plan, what would be his aspirations for his greatest work sometime in the future?
Yes, so long-term
Hold
plan.
on.
What is your long? Sure.
I'm sorry, 1 second.
Well, we wait. Yeah, so that's okay. He'll be back.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So the question was long-term plans. What do you hope to do with composing? And again, composing is very difficult to do. You really have to love it, and you really have to know music better than most people. And
not just that, but the instruments.
Not just the instruments, knowing the ranges and the forms. And so the question is, what are you hoping to do? What's your goals? What's your journey goals? Right? Is that the question?
Okay. Currently, I'm pursuing a master's degree in French horn performance at Temple under Ernesto Tovar, who's the fourth horn of the Philly Orchestra. And the goal is to continue to get better at horn for the time being and hopefully play professionally. Playing in any orchestra professionally is a dream of mine. After I finish my degree, which hopefully will be next spring of 2022, I'll graduate from Temple, and the goal is to go on for a doctorate in musical composition. I would like to teach at the collegiate level, composition and/or French horn. But I'd also like to dabble more in music production, maybe work in a recording studio, maybe work for a TV station as a production engineer. So I got no limits at this point. So I'm just very excited, looking forward to the future.
Great. That's a great, sounds good. Does anybody else have questions? I have one, if anybody. Let's talk about the second movement, the second piece rather, and let's talk about something different than just music. Let's talk about the recording process, all those tracks. So go back to the screen.
Okay.
And this is very complex stuff. And Isaac is he's excellent in terms of these audio engineering stuff. So you go back and explain like all these different colors on the screen, what they're about, how the recording process works for people. And has anybody been in a recording studio here? I have, but no. So none of these people have. So if you can describe that, that would be great.
Sure. So to start a recording session, you have to have the microphone set up, the computer set up. The most important thing is that the computer can hear the person performing, but that the person performing can also hear what's coming from the computer. So I have a box called an audio interface that takes care of importing the microphone sound into the computer, but also allows me to send all of the audio from the computer to the person performing so that they can hear it. Then we come to here, and all of these are different tracks. And you can see that they're numbered and labeled. So we have 1 to 6 here. And each of these was a different session for the most part. So here we have the soprano, Kristen. Here we have the tenor, Brenton. These are both cello because I used a different mic setup for that. And then we have the piano. So we'll look at Brenton here. So what I did for Brenton was I had one microphone that he sang into, and I use what's called a pop filter, which is a circular thing that attaches to the microphone and is mesh. So that way, when he says like words that start with P, that have P's in them or T's in them, which are called plosives, and they're called plosives because you're like blowing air into the microphone when you produce that sound. That way, it doesn't get picked up on the microphone. So what we would do is I had a track as a metronome click so that everything would be together. And then what we did is, as you can see up here, we have all of the meter. So here's 4/4/9/8. And then we also have all of the tempos involved. I can zoom in on that and you can see it here, for example. So the score is essentially imported into this, what's called a session. And after that, we just looked at the score, which I have here. This is the score for Forever Sleeping. And we just went section by section for everything that Brenton had to record, for example. And we just repeated that. So we would record the same thing multiple times. And the goal of recording the same thing over and over again is that way, let's say measure 1 was not what we wanted, but measure 2 was perfect. And let's say in another take, measure 1 is perfect, but measure 2 isn't. I can take them together and splice them together, make it sound like it's one recording. And I've done that here. So you can see that these are all different takes and that they're all color coded. And then if you look up here at the top track, you'll notice that there's a bunch of different colors. And this is what you actually hear when I hit the play button. I can zoom in on it here. And you can see here, for example, I literally cut one take in half and added something else to the end of it. And from there, it's all just about hiding the seams. So from here, what I have to, now that everything's been recorded and everything's been cut together, it's all about, are there any pitch issues? Taking care of that. Everything was recorded pretty close, so there's not a whole lot of room sound, and that can sound pretty jarring when you listen to it. So after that, it's also about adding effects. So for example, on Brenton, here you have one for pitch. It's called Melodyne. And if I open that up, you can see, did it open? Here we go. This is
called Isaac, could you show because I'm working on a project with some residents that they recorded, and I'd love to see an example of how to control the pitch. How do you control that pitch? If someone's off, how do you raise the pitch, lower the pitch? Could you show that? I don't know if that's possible.
What I do is when I record, I pull up this plugin and I'll click this transfer button and then I'll hit play. And when I hit play, it'll show where everything is pitch-wise. This one's already been edited, but you can see here, you see all of these different lines, and then there's these shapes, and all of these shapes are different words and pitches. And I can actually show you this here. So for example, if I do this, this is where initially things looked to start. So this is where the pitch sat. So to get after this, I have to rein it in and make sure that everything is in the correct place. So after that, I'll go up here, drag this, make sure everything is in the correct key. And you can see when I drag this, it moves everything. So we can listen to it before here. This is just Brenton before.
Look at all these people passing by. Their faces are empty. None can know why.
So that's before. And then if I do this, now it'll sound a little bit different.
Look at all these people passing by. Their faces are empty. None can know why.
That's a little bit different. And then from there, I can take each of these pitches and you can hear it when I hold it down. And then I can click and drag stuff to change the pitches. So for example, I can change this one to be like this.
Yeah, do that again. That's like the pitch thing. So each of those colors is a different pitch by half step. So it's all this. That's what it is. And the computer's showing how I'm a little flat, I'm a little sharp, and how you adjust that. So show that one more time. I'll turn the volume up on this so they can hear it.
So all I have to do is each of these are different pitches. I can click and drag and it puts it on the correct pitch. So for example, with the changes I just made, Brenton would sound like this.
Look at all these people passing by.
Whereas the original sounded like this.
Look at all these people passing by.
The differences with Brenton are very slight because he's very good at what he does. But the nice thing about this process is that even if Brenton sings a wrong note, for example, all I have to do is that to fix it. Highlight the notes that he sang, and then say, no, I want all the notes to be perfectly centered on the pitch and in the correct key. And then the software takes care of the rest. I can also time shift stuff too.
And people just don't understand how that is. Like when I recorded my CD, and like when I listen back, the post recording is kind of interesting too, because when you listen, oh, I was a little bit flat, and then you can raise the pitch with all these modern studios and stuff. I can tell you that we recorded, Isaac, at your dad's church in Reading, and we had a microphone set up, and we would take one section of the music and we would record it, like, depending on how many times it goes, so at least three or four times.
Yep.
And then you would choose the best. Like some of the ones, it took like literally 70 times for me to sing the same thing 70 times until I got it. Like, what was the one section that I struggled with other than the screaming one?
Ironically, it wasn't the singing part. It was the talking part.
It was the talk. No, it was one section where I kept messing up I was off by I was always off by like an eighth rest or something. And you hear a click track. So I had those headphones like we had last week, and you would hear, and you have a click track, and you have to be exactly on the beat. That talking was tough too, which it's not ready yet. So in a future time, we'll have to bring you back and just talk about the Forever Sleeping piece once it's not fully done yet. So you're only hearing the first minute. I just think that's incredible.
Thank you.
The stuff that you do is just it's amazing. So
thank you.
Does anybody else have questions before we wrap up the evening with this? Yes.
When you change the pitch, I understand that when you're shifting it only half a step or a little bit like this, that will really help the continuity of the piece. But with a real human voice, if you shift by a large amount, the actual component, the overtone mixture is different and the quality is different.
Yeah, talk about that. How if you change the pitch too much, then that it sounds a little distorted. The overtones sound a little distorted. Do you know about that? I'm sure you do. Why don't you talk about that?
1 second here. Let me just do this real quick. So if I restore this all to the original, here. So this is like where we started. But what I can also do then is if we'll take just this section, for example. And if I can take it and drag it all the way up here, you can hear that it does change. So I can change pitch, but only to a certain extent. As I told Brenton during the recording session, I can fix pitch issues so long as you're fairly close. What I can't fix is tone. So I can only fix the pitches to the degree that the tone will allow. And in this case, as you can see, that was we certainly pushed the limits. It becomes very synthy sounding. Sounds like a synthesizer.
That's exactly what we did last week, Isaac. We recorded for a virtual choir project that will be hopefully released soon. And I told every person that recorded, and all these people here today recorded, and I told them the pitch is not as important as the tone. If I can get, all these people, it's going to be harder to fix than look at all these people, that whatever the tone is, instead of look at all these people. Because if you have good tone, we can edit your pitch. But if you have this like really awful tone, then it's going to be harder to edit your pitch, especially for a choir thing that we're going to have soon that you'll release. That's why I was just like, just sing good tone, just sing good tone. And we'll go back and fix your pitch. It's the same thing with your stuff. Like it's the same with instrumentation with the cellist and the pianist and, you know, the soprano. And by the way, that's soprano LVC is Lebanon Valley College, if you didn't quite get that, Lebanon Valley College, right? So that's a great point to mention. Any other questions? Okay. Well, let's give you a hand one more time. Let's give a hand for Isaac Duquette. So I want to thank you, Isaac. We will definitely have you back once Forever Sleeping is fully released, and then we can talk more in detail in a future time, just Forever Sleeping. And we can really go into the details about, you know, the meaning of the piece, what mental health is going through right now in stages, and what we can do to make mental health problems be better and stuff. That's what that piece talks about. It's really a great topic, great discussion to talk. So thank you, Isaac. Our next Meet the Musician performer is Jai Bryant. Jai Bryant is an Australian Broadway composer, and he will be our July guest person. And he's a wonderful composer. He writes full Broadway shows, and he's a really great guy. And he'll talk about his music as well. But thank you, Isaac. I really appreciate this. We will definitely have you back again. And I want to thank everybody for listening to this, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks again.